lost my notes there. Where are they? Okay, here they go. So yeah, so today this is number 5, but it's the 6th thing we've hosted, because we did have our first kind of launch event was called Sutra to Tantra, and that was a bit of testing the ground. So we labeled that as session 0. So we've slowly been building on on this series that was supposed to be finished a while ago. But yeah, it's interesting, because I think a lot of the resources that we're putting together, we're kind of allowing them to happen on their own time frame, in the sense that so much of the way that we talk about things and language and what's working and what isn't working really is kind of defined by the interactions and the relationships that have been developed in the community over the past 2 years. So not rushing has kind of led to this point where our introduction series has taken almost 2 years to put out, but it seems fitting.
Yeah, it's interesting that we have a number of courses running concurrently as well. So we have introductions on the Stoa, then we have foundations for EG members, and we had contemporary Tantra for apprentices and pupils. Jared has been running Spacious Passion course, which I think you've changed now to Spacious Involvement. So there are a lot of these different opportunities for engagement and for finding out how to incorporate Vajrayana practices from different perspectives in ordinary life. And these are all, simultaneous. So a lot of activity at the moment.
Yeah, and today our topic we chose was natural kindness and appreciation. And I mean, I guess I thought the best way to start would be to talk about how, we bring up opening awareness all the time, because it's so foundational and it really is kind of connected to everything. So that seems to be where I usually start things. I think it was in our 3rd session, maybe 3rd, called Confidence, where we talked about how one of the kind of naturally arising results of the practice is a confidence in nebulosity or uncertainty or kind of groundlessness, but feeling very grounded in it and capable of kind of facing the world front on. Another aspect, and that's the result of this spacious presence that you become more and more familiar with. But there's so many different ways that impacts everyday life. And one of the ways is that because that spacious presence is non-discriminating, one of the simplest ways that I like to say is there's no such thing as a distraction with that type of awareness, then it leads to a type of kindness that is not conditional. It's not constructed or cultivated, but just kind of naturally emerging when there is a direct relationship with anything in your experience. And that type of, it's both, it's funny because it's both like very exotic, but also very kind of mundane in some way as well, where it's not like there's going to be, fireworks and explosions and Buddhas shooting out of your eyeballs or something like that. It's just like this very simple goodwill towards something, and like the fundamental understanding that you are, you have no problem being in relationship with whatever is arising, and your natural disposition is that of kindness. That is a bit unique, and maybe I'll wrap it back around, because we'll talk a bit about how this is different than the way a lot of the Buddhist discourse talks about compassion. But yeah, I think the direct relationship is maybe the most important thing here. If things aren't labeled as distractions or being put in good bad distinctions and everything like that, there is a type of relationship that is unelaborated. It's extremely direct, and one of the coolest parts is that it is, as we've kind of implied here, it's available with everything in all circumstances. It's always a possibility. Discovering that kind of direct compassionate, or maybe not compassionate. We'll not use that word to mix things here, but direct, kind relationship. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this. I think usually all of the examples that we come up with kindness is like, both to ourselves and our emotions, to others, whether they're somebody that you really like, or maybe you even dislike them, but the fact that there can be both this thing of being annoyed by somebody, or not agree with them, and yet still be kind is something, kind of the underlying kind of a miraculous discovery here, because it kind of breaks that that dualism that is kind of perennial, and when we in everyday life and things like that. um, yeah, maybe this is a good point, Charlie. Should we talk a bit about how this is different than compassion, kindness, natural kindness versus compassion?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you make that distinction. I wanted to delve into that a little bit more, and also pick up on your final point there, which is about um, the not needing to feel compassionate in order to be kind. I think we really want to labor that point, because there is often an assumption that um, in order to behave with kindness, it is necessary to already have a compassionate outlook and attitude. So it is not saying that that is not helpful, good, wonderful, very useful stance and feeling to have, because compassion is a felt sense. It's a feeling. It's a it, it's also a mental state. So, but it is personal. It is in the self. Whereas one of the ways that I would differentiate between compassion and kindness is that kindness is activity. So for the sake of this discussion, that's one of the ways that we are differentiating. Yeah. So there's a lot of assumption, just see this on Twitter and everywhere, that to be kind, I must feel compassion. So let's separate those out and say it is possible to be kind, whatever you are feeling. You could be feeling hatred, and you could still be kind. You could be feeling horny, you can still be kind. You can feel anything at all, and kindness is still available. So if there's just one thing to take away from today, it's that is possible. That is a real possibility in everybody's life. So there's a big question then, how? And we're going to come on and to talk about that a little later, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I want to connect this a bit to the defining characteristic of this of the kindness was this direct relationship, the directness, the non-elaborative side of things, the willing to be with something exactly the way it is, and not want it to be different. And the way that I often see that we would bringing kindness in a prescriptive way, that is actually putting something between. It's actually separating a bit. It's noticing that there's a immediate resistance, and yeah, to your point, there's definitely value in understanding that I can actually change the way that I'm feeling towards somebody, and so deliberately generating something can often be maybe a good place to start if you want to start loosening some of that habitual resistance to certain people or places or emotions or contexts or something like that. So so really it's completely, it's not saying that, oh well, you always got to do the natural kindness thing, compassion is just, it's all bullshit or something like that. It's just simply mentioning that these are very distinct different things, and yet at the same time, usually when we talk a lot about Buddhist translations and words and things like that. And I think it's been in Buddhist circles, compassion has been a bit dominant in the how to interact and how to be kind, or how to be a virtuous person, or whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know.
And there's a reason for that as well. Very good reason. Historically, compassion as meditation, generating compassion, creating a compassionate outlook, that has been around a very, very long time. It crosses all Buddhist paths. Historically, where it fitted changed somewhat. So as you come into the Mahayana and earlier as well, you have it beginning to fit into sets and then stages. So it's brought into staged paths. And then in the Mahayana, that is really taken to its ultimate conclusion, and compassion is dominant in the whole of Mahayana. It's related to perfection, of character. That is a really important thing to understand about practicing Mahayana. Compassion is the reason that you would practice cultivating compassion is for character perfection. It's not always spoken about in that way, because that kind of makes it sound like, oh, well, that's not about other people. It's not about all sentient beings. It's not about, relieving suffering from all sentient beings, because, of course, that is coupled with compassion. So what I'm talking about here is a framework for understanding, and that framework is the development of character perfections in order that eventually one becomes bodhisattva and is pure compassion, nothing except compassion, only compassion. So that is that framework, and that is where the emphasis on generating compassion comes from. So I want to go back to that generation and cultivation, because that is a very different framework for understanding possibilities than spontaneity, which is much more coming from the sort of later Vajrayana approaches. So it's not saying like this one is right, that one is wrong at all. We're just looking at the world in very different ways. So if you're looking at the world in a frame that says, in order to relieve suffering, you have to have compassion, then you're going to put all of your time and effort into developing, generating, making it happen, bringing compassion, because that is the answer. It's your solution. So what Vajrayana does, and the approach that we're taking in Evolving Ground, is that it relativizes that by bringing a different framework. It puts compassion into a somewhat different place, and it does some decoupling. So maybe it's a good idea to talk a little bit about causality here as well, because there are a lot of assumptions that come along with the idea that we're going to generate compassion, and there are assumptions around causality. So let's look at the relationship between compassion and kindness. There is a often unspoken assumption that in order to be kind, you have to have compassion, but the causality also runs the other way. Any kind act, you see a kind act, you see a compassionate manifestation in the world, and there is an assumption, oh, that comes from a place of compassion. So these two are very tightly connected in that framework. There's an assumption that the felt state is connected and is causal for any activity in the world and outside of the world as well, because it is ultimately it's a metaphysical framework that we have there. You're becoming pure compassion in order to leave this world. That is a really important bit of historical part of the framing there. So looking at that causality, we've already talked a little bit about decoupling the compassion from being necessary to cause kindness acts. The other way around, when you see kindness, or when you are in relationship, as Jared was talking earlier, like this direct relationship, if you assume that compassion is necessary for activity, then you're in a very different place to immediately discovering that possibility from relationship. So relationship is activity. Activity means, any activity means that kindness is possible there. So, I was thinking about how do you make that switch? How do you change from having this sort of possibly habitual or underlying assumption? And I'm not saying that it is necessarily easy, but one of the ways is that is where appreciation comes in. There's a spaciousness that gives rise to appreciation through the sense fields, through sound, sight, immediate embodied response. And if you can appreciate circumstances, then kindness can be available because there is spaciousness there. Another way is simply to just make a decision. You just make the decision, whatever I'm feeling, I intend to be kind. Doesn't matter whether I'm feeling grumpy or snarky or irritated or angry, I am just going to be kind. The rest of my life, any circumstances that arise, that could be pretty liberating.
Yeah, it's interesting, Charlie. I think the causality and the difference between the internal state and the activity is very. I think it's important here, and I think it defines the difference. I think by default, if there is not spaciousness, meaning if there's not awareness of what is happening in the circumstance, then there's no choice but to act out the feeling that you're coming from. So I'm feeling angry, and that is all there is. Like, the whole vibe of my experience is anger, and therefore there's nothing I can do other than to act from this. The moment that anger is arising within a larger context, then there is actually a choice. You can choose, and that choice is so that is what the spaciousness is, what allows the choice to arise.
Nicely put.
Yeah, spaciousness is it's one of those, we use it all the time, and yet it's kind of counterintuitive if it's not something you've had common experience with, I guess. And yeah, what it does do to emotions is it flips the script from them being the dominant container for moment-to-moment experience to them being an aspect of it, and you're no longer habitually driven to act from that space. And the stranger thing too is that those emotions can still, that emotion, even if it's anger, the way that the way that activity manifests from it when there is spaciousness will often not look like, it doesn't have to look like stereotypical anger either. So that there is a kind of transformed relationship of working with the energy or the emotion or the vibe of the situation that was not there before. It was kind of by default happening.
That the description of the flip that you make there is also pretty important, and you get this in psychological frameworks as well, and development frameworks, but it is a flip that occurs in relation to your emotional personal emotional experience of the world. And it's pretty dramatic. It can take years for that to happen through practice, through meditation. Meditations often, they're not necessarily an aspect of that change occurring. But the flip that we're talking about is, it could be encapsulated as the change that occurs from your emotions having you to you having your emotions. That's that spaciousness that Jared is talking about there. I think it is that you are not driven and controlled by your emotional responsiveness. If you are, then it makes very good sense to want to cultivate compassion a lot, because you need that in order to be pretty socially functional. You know, if you have a lot of anger and hatred and stuff going on and very turbulent emotions, and they are completely dominating, they're completely in control of how you respond, then without that space, there's a very good reason to be sitting down, working with compassion, generating that feeling of love, compassion for other people, working with that. So that fits very well in that context. If you're in that situation, you can also be meditating, learning to find that spaciousness that we're talking about, such that emotions become less scary, less dominant, less directive of how you are in the world. And like I said, that can take a long time. Sometimes you can be in a better space and you can find that spaciousness, and then it becomes available that you can simply, like, okay, I'm carrying out my decision to be kind here, whatever. At other times, that simply may not be possible. You've got to be realistic. And then maybe the best action is just, okay, I'm just going to leave this situation a little, be courteous and polite and just step back, remove myself from the possibility of decapitating somebody here.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you touched on appreciation. That is where we're going next, but I want to pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions or comments or confusions or disagreements, whatever's alive for you at the moment, emotions that need to be expressed or not.
Could you guys say something about the common scripts of being kind or nice or whatever? So it's like I have this intention to be kind, even though I feel angry or pouty or selfish or whatever. But like there has to be some knowledge of what that is, right? Like if you're feeling angry and you're also not feeling like settled and grounded, then it's like, how do you know what being kind is or what the kind move? I was in a situation recently with a neighbor that some people have heard about, and it's like I could feel my mind going towards like all of these different prescriptions of like, well, being nice is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or being kind is following the legal prescriptions for this situation, or like there was all these like scripts that I could follow, and I knew that like, okay, none of that is working here, but like what is it? And I didn't have the spaciousness to sort of just drop in to like whatever would naturally arise. So there's like this, it feels like there's this middle ground to me where I have the intention to be kind, but I kind of like don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm. I think that's how it is often. I think it is very difficult to script as soon as you get outside of a fixed prescriptive ethical framework. Like you're describing now, you have a kind of meta systematicity, but at the same time, when you see other people being kind, you know that it's kind of there. You're able to perceive kindness in the world. it's usually pretty obvious. And for oneself, I think it is never possible to perfect that. It's always a difficult, potentially difficult situation that you have to navigate and not know what is kind. So you're, in some sense, by switching frameworks, by doing that flip here, you're agreeing with yourself that, this is not possible to script. I'm going to try and come up with responses in different ways. And, sometimes I'm going to get it wrong. And it's something that you just gradually learn more and more over the years or whatever. And that is the change in assumption from assuming compassion is the answer to assuming there is no prescriptive answer. It is difficult. Situations are messy. This is going to go wrong sometimes. And yet I'm just going to see if I can be kind and learn from others as well. I remember years and years ago, I was registered for a therapy course. I was training to be a psychotherapist, and there was a weekend course, and it was in this obscure place, and the instructions were kind of all over the place, and I'd left loads and loads of time to get there, and I just couldn't find this damn place. And I was running late, and I was getting more and more and more heated up, and we didn't have texting or anything at that time, so I had to go and find a phone box, and I was calling the leader of the course, and I was just getting more and more and more irate, and like, oh, these instructions are just rubbish, they're really unclear, they're imprecise. It could, I was just in a right state, and the whole thing had started already. I'll just never forget this. It was a small thing, but the leader of that course, she got everybody doing an exercise, got everyone settled in, and she came out to find me. She literally walked out and went looking around the streets and found me and said, oh, you must be so frustrated. Yeah, those instructions were just terrible. One day, come on in and, we'll get you a cup of tea. And, and that was just so kind. And it wasn't at all the response that I was expecting at that time. I was just thinking, I'm going to be late, everyone's going to be mad, blah, 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 or whatever I was thinking. I don't know. It's a long time ago. But I just remember that because it was an act of kindness. She didn't have to do that. She didn't have to come out. And it was very skillful. I think kindness and skill, relational skill, and being able to have this overview of a situation, see the whole situation, just see what needs to be done for the benefit of others, and to help everybody get what they need and have a happy time. It's very, very practical. It's very simple in some ways. It's just like, oh, that person's upset. What do they need for reassurance or to help them in this situation? I think, maybe drawing from that experience that I had, I would say that simplifying things, is a really good way to go. If you don't know how to deal with a situation and it's complicated and everyone, things are all getting chaotic, just what is the most simple thing that can be done here to just help relationships and people get what they need from this?
I think that's the like the point where I'm sort of feeling a little pouty about, is like compassionate, like even when it's hard, you kind of know, like, am I doing it or am I not doing it? I feel like I can kind of control it within myself. Kindness, like when you say like, oh, it's requires skill, like, yeah, I like, and I know that I don't have the skills in certain domains, and it's like,
me too.
What can I do in the moment?
Right.
I can't generate the skill in the moment. I can't just like level up immediately, and so then it's like there's like frustration.
Right. Yeah, and it is like that. It is. You know, there are some situations that require a skill that you don't yet have, but by being in that situation, you know, very often muddle through in one way or another. You know, I bet your neighbor's still there, right? There's plenty more opportunity to interact with your neighbor. You know, maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't work out. You know, maybe you can look back on that and say, yeah, damn, you know, if I'd have said that, or if, you know, if I'd have thought to be like this or to offer that or whatever, then something might be different. Or, you know, maybe it's just not going to work out.
Yeah, then maybe it's not going to work out. It feels like it's both kind of like sad, but also it's kind of liberating because, you know, then you're giving yourself the permission to do your best, knowing that you can't do otherwise. I'm thinking about romantic relationships that I've been in. It's probably one of the places I have a lot of experience with argument and things like that, because I'm a serial monogamist. And I think that if I were to look at things from a distance now, I do think that a lot of the conflicts that arise come from the assumption that whatever the activity is, it is emblematic of the intention. And specifically, however the activity is affecting me must match the way that their internal state or their intention. If I'm hurt from it, then they must have been wanting to hurt me. And I can't count how many times it was, well, I didn't mean that. I wasn't trying to, you know, whatever it was, you know, it's just back and forth. And the decoupling of these two seems like it could have been really valuable. And it's a skill that I think I've developed in a lot of those things later on, to basically say, like, this is how I'm feeling based on an interaction. And I'm not saying that you are intending to do that. And just giving that space of saying, like, this is my reality, creates a lot of space and some perspective. And then, you know, also kind of confronting the messiness of that every action could lead to good or bad or both, probably both in each situation results.
Hey, Jared, I
Yeah.
just want to see that you saw this. There was a question about spaciousness in the chat from Ollie that is good that you were just talking about space there.
Yeah. So Ollie asked, I'm new to this term spaciousness. Would you say that it has some similarity to metacognitive awareness from the TMI framework? Some similarity would be a good way of saying it, like in the sense that that type of widening or expanding your awareness can give you a bit more perspective and create more options and lead to some less reactive stuff. But they are very distinct in the sense that, at least from my experience, I didn't go all through 10 stages when I was in my TMI days. So maybe the fruit is different than I assume. So I don't want to speak for the system completely. But it's my experience that a lot of, well, there's a couple of things. One, the way that awareness is talked about in TMI is it prescribes a certain demeanor or vibe to it, and phenomenology. So, you know, the broad awareness in that system is blurry, peripheral, non-detailed, and kind of foggy, I guess they would say, whereas opposed to the attention is very sharp and concise and detailed. When you don't make those distinctions between attention and awareness and allow for naturally open awareness to come up, then it's kind of like, I would say maybe like less constrained, and it doesn't have, you know, the type of metacognitive awareness that gets dialed in that TMI system also comes with this like equanimity, as like a chillness, like you know, it's like, oh, relax. I have to like really like be okay with everything. I got to be okay with everything and calm, and it kind of prescribes a certain demeanor. But the spaciousness, as we said, like there can be rage emerging from within a spacious field of awareness. So a little different, and it's such a minor distinction, and yet very profound, because the way that type of broad awareness interacts with things like thoughts and emotions and things like that is a lot less manipulative and a lot less vigilant, because that metacognitive awareness usually is kind of something that is maintained through a vigilance, and often will kind of cut certain things out of experience, like thoughts or emotions, or look away from emotions and things like that. I don't know if is that helpful at all, Ollie? And Charlie, you feel free to, I know you dabbled in your the TMI phase too, and I think you said you had some very interesting emotional reactions. It kind of made you a bit grumpy.
I'm thinking about spaciousness, and I think you've said everything that I would have said in that relationship with that system. I'm not super familiar. Spaciousness, we're using that synonymously with spacious presence in this context. Spacious presence is what you get from practicing opening awareness. And it's a rough translation of, or substitute for a Tibetan term, nepa, which is literally, that means presence of awareness with absence of stuff arising in mind. So it's a non-conceptual, spacious awareness. It is very clear, bright. It's full of potential. That's one of the ways that it's differentiated from maybe a more equanimous, spacious, calm experience. It's not necessarily quiet. Can be quiet, can be calm, but there is also an alertness there. So it's not that calm and no thought are always correlated. You can have no thought, concept-free awareness, and that is just very bright, very vibrant, immediate, like what Jared was describing earlier in terms of that direct immediacy of the sense fields when you're in relation in the world.
I think the potential, it might be one of the, well, the vividness, as you said, the sharpness and the vividness is something that is a little different, in the sense that everything that arises within that spaciousness is very, because there's no concept between
no
you
elaboration.
and it. Elaboration.
There's no conceptual elaboration.
Yeah, things can be very, very vivid, but the potential for me feels like one of the most kind of remarkable things. A lot of times when people will talk about like trying to describe this state, it's just very simple and kind of mundane when you just talk about it, but the experience of it is quite different. But the potential, I've heard people say something like, it felt like anything could happen, like, right, like there's this very vivid sense, like I had no idea what was going to happen and anything could. And there's also, as we talked about before, there's also the awareness that there's a choice, that you could make the choice to become involved or elaborate on things at any moment. And that's part of that potential, is the opportunity for you to dive in and do stuff and manipulate things and be a human.
A lot of what we're talking about today in relation to spaciousness or spacious presence is related to the path aspect in evolving ground. That is, that you bring spaciousness from your sitting, from your practice, from your past experience. You have some experience of spaciousness, and you bring that into activity. And that process we call spacious involvement. But that is characteristic of the Buddhist tantric way of relating to the world. You're bringing spaciousness with you in order that you can respond more skillfully, empower situations, do things differently than you might otherwise. The result of that path, the tantric results are mastery, skill, power. These are very worldly oriented results.
Well, we had another question Peter wanted me to bring up that I think might be helpful. Might have to do some more definitions. This is kind of like the trope of Evolving Ground of VG, is that we really torture words and being very precise with what they mean, because they do have such an impact on experience in very interesting ways, both practice and everyday life. So Peter's question was, is wise kindness and unwise kindness a helpful distinction? If so, when does the latter happen? Well, one thing, this speaking of semantics, wise, if we're being proper Buddhists, wisdom is associated with openness or spaciousness side of things. Whereas I think in a lot of Western contexts, it's usually perceived as activity or knowledge or experience or something like that. And so that might be the two are kind of inseparable in some sense, but yeah, it might be a way of a good caveat to throw out there as we were talking about this. So if I were to simply look at those, wise kindness feels similarly synonymous to this natural kindness, in the sense that it's the assumption there is that there is spaciousness included. Unwise kindness would be the absence of spaciousness, but kindness still arising. I think maybe that would be a little bit more what we were talking about with compassion, in the sense that you're feeling kind, and so what you do is kind or compassionate. I don't know, Charlie, how are you feeling about my translation projects here?
Yeah.
My semantics games.
I really love this this distinction as well from Peter. It's great. Traditionally, what you were pointing to there, wisdom is emptiness, compassion is form, and those two are the non-duality of those two are the result of Mahayana as well. Mahayana moving into Tantra. So you have the non-duality of wisdom and compassion as extremely important in cultivation of compassion. It's that side, and then finding emptiness is the wisdom side. So that's how those two correlate in the more traditional context. So, wise kindness is, to me, it feels like a move away from wisdom compassion coupling into more of a tantric orientation, where you have kindness activity, wisdom maybe being more of the spacious aspect that we've been talking about. But that would be looking at it in a very traditional type of framework. I mean, just in practical terms, wisdom, how would we define wisdom? And it's kind of difficult. To me, it relates to experience a lot. You think of, if I think of people who I think are wise, who really are wise, they're people who have they've had a lot of experience in the world, working in different situations, like work, maybe put their lifelong effort into a particular area that they've gotten a lot of knowledge, they've got to know very well, and then they can relate wisely because they have that knowledge. So not the same as knowledge. There's this differentiation between wisdom, which is more spacious, and knowledge, which is more technical, more specific. And yet those two are very much coupled together. You develop one, and then you're able to understand better how to apply that in contexts, how to use that in different unexpected circumstances. So wise kindness, I guess, would be having practiced kindness enough that you have some familiarity with how things are going to pan out in certain relational situations, or maybe thinking of parenting. Well, I'm not a good person to talk about parenting because I don't have children, but I see wise, skillful, kind parents, and their wisdom comes from having understood their children really well, and gotten used to how they respond in different situations, and they kind of just know what's going to be the right thing here. That seems to me like an example of wise kindness. You've got that contextual history that you've learned from, and you're applying that to a present moment.
The flip side, the other side of the coin of knowing what's right to do in that situation, I think, is knowing what's right to do in that situation, while also knowing how that there's a lot of the situation that is unknowable. So it's not like you're completely certain that of what the outcome is going to be. There's still a visceral understanding that I don't know if this is going to work, because every new situation is a little different. And yet I'm feeling pretty confident based on my past experience. And so it's this strange thing of being, that maybe the union of that, of knowledge and an openness to, and humility to knowing that maybe it won't work.
There's a kind of relaxedness, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If you're confident in that uncertainty of outcome, there's some kind of relaxedness in the situation. It's like, okay, we've had the similar situation to this many times before. Let's just ride it, see what happens. There's this phrase, idiot compassion, which comes up sometimes, especially in Vajrayana. And that is, I associate that with being nice, with this sort of prescribed niceness. There's a way in which you can be so obsessed with having to present or be nice in a situation of people pleasing, that kind of thing. I think people pleasing would be a good example of idiot compassion. So unwise compassion. I've been a people pleaser in the past, and I remember that that sense of being driven by wanting the other person to feel okay about me and about the situation. And it's very, very different from being willing to experience other people not liking you. I mean, it's actually very liberating to just be totally fine with being disliked. And sometimes kindness can just be stepping into, like, I don't care what anybody thinks about me here. I'm just not going to let this thing happen. Like you were talking about choice earlier as well, Jared. Like, there are so many moments and possibilities where you can just choose to be active and to step into a situation which is actually more challenging, it's more courageous than just letting things be as they are in many ways. You see this, like, if you see somebody being a bit nasty, being mean, you can choose to just say something that will help a situation there. And then you've got a lot of complex questions around, what is being a busybody? What is intervening inappropriately? What is, how is that different from just actually helping people get along?
and it seems like there is the skill with interacting in a certain context is something that I think everybody's familiar with. So like I think back when I was in my corporate gig as a manager, I started to learn a lot about how to deal with issues and disagreements and everything like that. And yet at the time I didn't have a ton of spaciousness. So the whole orientation for me was, I'm gonna figure out the equation here. I'm gonna solve it. And it was so funny because I would go through these cyclical patterns of like dialing in my whole philosophy on how to manage, and it would get more and more solid and precise. And along the way, I'm getting a lot of results from it. But eventually, it would become utterly rigid, and something would pop up. A certain circumstance would pop up where I realized that it just didn't work at all, and I had to. And then, predictably though, then I'd be like, "Oh, that was all bullshit. Now I'm going to find the real thing." And with spaciousness, there's this strange thing of doing that refinement and that skill development without the assumption that you're going to arrive at some fixed result, and willing to also bring in other systems and compare and contrast, and not kind of be looking for the one to rule them all. And that is yeah, it's a different path, but a lot of it has to do with both the familiarity with and comfort with nebulosity, knowing that you're not going to arrive at a fixed point, and there will always be uncertainty, and the time and effort of putting it in, regardless of not being motivated by the stick of getting your everything perfect or something like that. There's a very different results, but look kind of similar in some sense. I know we have a couple other things, but I wanted to bridge into, so we talked a lot about kindness, but we did touch a bit on appreciation. But I wanted to bridge that gap a bit, and then we can open things out again and talk a bit about how, as Charlie said, both this is this type of kindness and appreciation is kind of naturally arising when you become familiar with awareness, with that spaciousness, the spacious awareness. But there's also ways of deliberately practicing it too. So that's where I want to end, so we can spend some decent time talking about, okay, well, this is all cool philosophy from a philosophical perspective. But yeah, what does it look like to actually engage with this stuff? So we'll get there. Appreciation. And Charlie, I have my notes here, and as you were speaking, it did some distinction between the two of appreciation and kindness. But one of the ways that I characterized it was that kindness works really well when we're talking about being in a relationship with a circumstance, people, emotions, yourself, all of these things. But the type of goodwill, that like simple goodwill towards something, manifesting with everything, happens all over the place. And so it just kind of makes sense from a word choice to say that this simple goodwill has many facets to it, and another facet is appreciation. And that is a little bit less elaborate, in the sense that it can be the appreciation of a flower, a memory, a smell, a taste, nails scratching on the chalkboard, or pain or disgust, like all of these things similar to the kindness. It's always possible to find appreciation in any situation with anything, if that direct relationship is there. And yet we become very habitually conditioned to say, oh, disgust, I don't want to do anything with that. Pain, yeah, I want to push that away. There's nothing, I don't need a direct relationship with it. I actually need to move away from it, create separation from it. But this kind of the radical thing of this direct relationship is that even in pain, you could find appreciation, which I think English language in general makes it hard for this to make any sense. one of the simplest, the best metaphors that I could think of that was like a little bit more colloquial is the taste of bitterness, the flavor of bitterness, where we all kind of know like, yeah, bitter is kind of like, it's kind of bad in some way, but a lot of people like bitter, and I'm one of those people or
I
something
like
like that.
bitter.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it too.
Oh, I love bitter. Yeah.
And so just learning that all of the of life has that same potential to discover some appreciation, is kind of a bit of a radical thing, I think, in some sense. And the more
Yeah.
familiar you become with, the more you practice these things, and the more familiar you become with integrating that spaciousness to get the direct relationship, the easier it is for that natural appreciation to kind of just spontaneously arise. I know that one of the natural ways that it arose for me, and I talk about it all the time, is with country music. Like I had just, my whole life it was just like country, like girl, get it out of here, just get it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want it anywhere near me. I don't like anything about it. And I started to be open to the idea. It's like, maybe I could appreciate something in country. Like, I don't know, maybe it's possible. And so I like kind of threw myself in the world, and I still hate most of it, but there's a few there's a few country artists and songs now, a good chunk that I've really found some appreciation for. This is a good affirmation that
Nice.
not everything is, there's potential in all spaces.
I want to separate it from liking and disliking as well, because there's a way in which you can appreciate the qualities of things, circumstances, without liking them. And this is really important as practice as well. So there's a way in which you can relate this to yourself, to your feelings. You can relate this to your relationships. You can relate this to differences. So, when I talk about or think about appreciation, I think about differences, distinctions. Appreciation works through seeing distinctions, seeing definitions, differences. You see the color of something, the texture, and it's like, oh, wow, look at that. And the appreciation is there because of its difference. That's the same with people. Man, that person is loud. Whoa. You can just appreciate their loudness without necessarily liking what they're saying or liking their demeanor. You could just like, whoa, I never heard anyone that loud. That's amazing. So there's a sense of appreciation being very much connected to that living directly through the sense fields, through sight, sound, color, tactile sensitivity, all of that. I think so. In the same way that there's this relationship between compassion and kindness that is very nebulous, that is not easily defined, that is not necessarily causal but could be, there's the same relationship between appreciation and what was I going to say?
Liking,
thank you. Preference, appreciation and preference. So it's very easy to appreciate stuff that you like, that you love. It's just so easy. It comes very naturally. But because we associate liking with appreciation, it's less obvious and less ordinary, normal to appreciate qualities of stuff that you don't like. But it's entirely possible. And that's somewhat to do with relating to things conceptually or not as well. Like you go along, see, like you could see some oil coloring a puddle because there's a bit of an oil spill or something like that. Now, if you have everything bundled up together, you have your pollution consciousness bundled up with your this is what this is situation. All you can see is there is pollution here. Ugh, that's horrible. You can decouple your appreciation of the colors and the beauty of petrol on water at the same time as knowing that, yeah, there's some pollution here. I don't like the fact that there is pollution, but man, look at those colors. I really appreciate how they're shining off the water. That's, that's an odd example because you don't go anywhere necessarily with that appreciation, but in many relational situations, you have the same kind of decompression of liking or disliking with appreciation. Wow, I wouldn't behave like that in this circumstance, but I can really appreciate how it is having an impact and making a difference in a way that, I might not have thought of. A very, very different personality to that person, but wow, look at the way that they're able to navigate that situation. There's some skill there, maybe not how I would have thought about going around things. So appreciation, I think, is connected to differences, to distinctions, and it arises naturally when it's a result, but you can also take a stance towards the world, one of appreciative wonder. You simply just be in that state, and again, that relies very much on spaciousness, having found some spaciousness to be able to do that.
Rory asks in the chat for clarification, how are appreciation and equanimity different? I asked for, I just sent a message saying for a short description of equanimity. This is just one of those words that I think has a variety of connotations with it. In some instances, people are talking about the kind of neutral awareness, where there's no push or pull. It's just like bare awareness, which feels more toward what we're talking about. But in other situations, I think equanimity also gets lumped in with a type of calmness or demeanor or vibe. So it's like, well, everything is kind of the same, and I'm experiencing it all as kind of the same thing. It's flattening things in some way. So non-interference with details of phenomena is the non-interference with the details of phenomena.
Just before you dropped that in the chat, Rory, I was going to say that equanimity has very different, slightly different connotations and meanings in different contexts. Usually, so equanimity does come into Vajrayana and Dzogchen terminology quite a lot, but I kind of feel like it has a somewhat different resonance in Vajrayana context than it does in, say, for example, the no self framework, or also in Mahayana as well. So it has it in some sutric context. It is very specifically the result of cessation of feeling, the result of cessation of sense responsiveness in the world. So in that context, it is really very different to the kind of calm, present, engaged equanimity that you would find in more tantric or Vajrayana context. So there's that. Your definition in the chat was non-interference with the details of phenomena. To me, appreciation has a vibrancy to it. It has, so it's related to stance and detail and difference, like I was saying about color and texture. There's this engagement there. So there's a kind of involvement in terms of noticing difference. Equanimity to me describes a state of mind that is very quiet, There's a quietness, maybe a vastness. It's very expansive, but it is not. It's not clearly differentiating between stuff that arises and stuff that is seen or stuff that is there in mind. It's the holding space within which appreciation can occur. I think I would make that kind of difference. I don't often use the word equanimity, but I'd be more inclined to use spaciousness or spacious presence. But I think there is a relationship there.
Yeah, and I'm totally open to the, because equanimity gets brought up a lot because it's used so much, especially in the Western Buddhist contemporary scene, and I think to your point, Charlie, there is definitely a way of using it in a more life-affirming orientation, but the way that I experienced what I would have called equanimity when I was doing a lot more renunciation, there was, as you said, there was a expansive awareness, but similar to what I was talking about, the difference between what we're describing as awareness or spaciousness and the way that awareness was defined in the TMI system, where there's like a kind of prescribed, like a foggy, like there's a bit of a distance. It's like you're able to see everything as it is because you're not going to get involved with it. And so it's stepping back a bit and allowing things to be as they are without your involvement. That's different when when you're stepping back or when you're resting and you're not involved with anything. But as we said, there's that very obvious, I could get involved at any moment. That potential creates like a vividness and a vibrance. And appreciation for me, the way that manifests is like that's the understanding that like when there's a potential for involvement with something, then I don't know where it's going to come from. So like my country, like I had no idea what kind of country music I was going to like. But if I were to just like put myself in a room and blast it over me, be around it and try and become okay with it, but never with the intention that maybe I'll start listening to this certain artist all the time. It would have been it would have been a more detached or distant or kind of calming situation. Whereas going into it is being, okay, I'm going to remain open to everything and be ready for that moment when something catches me. And then it's the difference that actually, the difference in how I relate to it personally, the fact that I like it, becomes a lot more differentiated. It feels difference seems important here, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm going in circles, but there's differences what is appreciated and appreciation, or a big part of appreciation rather than sameness.
There's a lot of directed energy in appreciation. Like there's connection through a sort of, I know energy is a bit of a woo word, but a felt physical excitement in response. Maybe that's piti, that waves of sensation, or maybe it's a intense gut response, but there is a physical embodied response with appreciation. It's right there, and it's not always the same. So equanimity implies sameness, I think. There's a sameness of like a sort of holding of quietness or holding of spaciousness within which that directed, connected, energetic response can occur.
It might simply because, one of the things that we talk a lot about is that a lot of the sutric methods or the renunciative methods, they do this thing where you, over a long period of time with a lot of practice, you learn to kind of get distance from a lot of things that are that are distractions or unwholesome, or name your name. These are the things that you shouldn't be paying attention to. And when you do that for a really long time, things like emotions and thoughts really kind of recede into the background, and eventually become almost imperceivable. Whereas I'm feeling like, maybe we could say like equanimity, when there is without renunciation, means that you're in constant contact with your individuality, your preferences, or not your preference, your your preferences, your sensation, your emotion, all of these things, they're so very close with you that it becomes very obvious when they're connecting with some aspect of the experience. And so just having that familiarity and the presence of all of the things that make you unique and the things that you appreciate in your own way changes the whole demeanor of of that spaciousness, because there's always a potential for some sort of relationship. You're discovering in that context what you personally are connecting with.
I love that you made that distinction, Rory, because it's pointing to different experiences that could be described by the term equanimity. And like Jared was just pointing to, there is this very, very calm, maybe somewhat dissociated experience that is characterized by, has a kind of flatness to it, but it is characterized by renunciation in some sense. You're putting other things at bay in order that this same calm experience can be there. It's a mental experience all the time. And that is very different to what I think is described as equanimity in the context that we're talking about, where it is the spacious potential for all sorts of stuff to be going on. So that it does have a quietness, it does have a calmness, that experience, but it's also very vibrant, vivid.
Yeah, and for me, I like restful rather than calm, because calming kind of feels like adding something. Resting is like, what happens when the waters are allowed to settle on their own? There's a different vibe there.
Yeah. There's often in a more renunciative context, there's a sense of controlling, and calming is used to mean controlling turbulence, keeping it at bay, putting it under tabs. There's a vigilance there. Whereas I like that resting type of calmness is a bit different.
Yeah, that's my pithy description of, because the result of opening awareness being thoughtlessness, but so is a lot of other systems. But I love the very simple way of saying, like, the mind, what's the difference between when the mind comes to rest versus is vigilantly stamped out? Those are very different experiences. And so, as you can imagine, a familiarity with that resting is going to give you, that ties into everyday life. And so, there are times where things are at rest, and it feels natural for that to be the case.
Yeah. It leads to a different kind of demeanor as well. It's there's an easefulness, a sort of quality of ease. And because it's connected to activity and being in the world and doing stuff, then the way that ease manifests is through grace, through graceful navigation. So there's still that activity there.
I know we just have 5 minutes left on the count. Do we want to touch a bit on? So we've talked a lot about it being kind of a natural result of the practice of your formal practice, but did you want to say something about how somebody might want to do some deliberate practices off the cushion or on the cushion that would, get some flavor for this natural forms of appreciation and kindness.
Hmm. Yeah, so we mentioned one already, which is just deciding, taking a view. That is very sparse, if you like. It's extremely simple, unelaborate approach. You can have much more elaborate, more ritualistic styles of approach. So one of the Gompa sessions in Evolving Ground, which is when all of our members get together and we discuss a particular topic. One of those we had on kindness rituals. So we have, I think a 90-minute discussion around how it is possible to create for yourself rituals that are reminders about being kind. I don't have any examples coming to mind at the moment. Does anyone remember some examples from that discussion? Like every time I do X, then Y, that kind of format.
I remember one that somebody brought up, and I stole it from them. They are on this call. I won't call them out though. It was with my wife. I have a very common habit of entering the same room as her after we've been apart, and something's really exciting for me. And I just immediately bombard her with like, guess what just happened? It was so cool. And then we did it. And she's just like, oh my God. And so the kindness ritual of coming into that space, noticing that I want to completely dominate it immediately, regardless of what's going on for them. And then, take a moment and be like, hey, can I have your ear for a bit? You want to hear about something, or are you still wrapping something up? And it's just this very simple checking in and being aware of, where they're at, and a bit more respectful. And that was I like that. The very simple one, but it's such a great ritual.
It's nice because it's related to a habit. So it's like you find a habit, you see that there is a habit or a pattern that you're regularly engaging with, and then the ritual aspect comes from the fact that it's a pattern, that it's something that keeps recurring, that you've kind of already dialed in through your experience. And so you're intervening in your patterning with intent to provide spaciousness, to do something different. So you can do that any number of times with millions of patterns. You see something, you notice it. So you notice it as a pattern, you notice it having a pretty regular effect, or an undesired effect that you would like to change. And then you decide, how am I going to change this pattern? And then each time you notice it, you provide the antidote. So that's much more of a deliberate, intentional way of working with personal experience and relationships. And you could do that with your own ways that you spend time or whatever. Like, I notice that I get to like 9 o'clock at night, and every night, without fail, I have this pattern that I'll just go, watch a thing or whatever. But I kind of feel about that. I sort of like it, but I don't like it. There's a tension there. So every time I feel that tension, I will do something different. And here's the set of things that I could choose from. And then you test that for a while. Really simple changing patterns. So that's a kindness to yourself in some way.
Yeah, patterns, I think, is probably the best broad descriptor. Another one that I find really helpful, because it has a little bit more of like a down to earthness spatial component, is boundaries. That you mentioned, that my spacious involvement workshop that I've been running for a while now, and we deliberately work with what we call mundane boundaries, which is like the patterns that section off places or things that that you can't go do. And the reason you put that in boundary or establish that pattern is kind of like, I don't really know why. Or if you did if you did establish it, it's not like it's like this is high stakes, this is security. It's just like, oh, yeah, I don't know. I just kind of stuck with it. That's not it felt like a good heuristic. And I'm never the person that takes public transit, and I've completely removed any possibility. And so a lot of that workshop, we just kind of deliberately look at those spaces in life that you've sectioned off as not available for appreciation and enjoyment, and put yourself in one, and that is safe, and see be open to the fact that you could enjoy something about it, and that it feels like such an interesting, yeah, so many things come up. I mean, I can't count how many different amazing examples that we've heard of, but it's my country music is my perfect descriptor of that same type of method. So maybe put yourself, I know you went shopping, right, Charlie, and made yourself like be very deliberate because you hate shopping.
Did I? Yeah, I don't remember that. Yeah, I've probably shut it out of mind because it was so horrendous. What did I do?
I don't know.
It was did I make a point of being kind to the
you were appreciating all the fabrics and the colors, and enjoying the very simple sensations, but yeah, in a place where you normally don't meander through a shopping mall or something like that.
Yeah, that's funny. I was just thinking when you were talking that there are different cultural kindnesses as well. Like different cultures have sort of kindness rituals built in to them that help society function well. And when you're traveling between different places, you don't necessarily know what all those are. A lot of people think in terms of, oh, it's just social convention to, you have a bow in an Asian culture, or you have a handshake, or you have these different social conventions, but you could think about them as being kindness rituals. They're there to put other people at ease, like help people have a good time, smooth relational conversations and communications, and just make things easier for people. That's a kindness. Like in Britain, it's a very common kindness that if anyone's staying with you, you take them a cup of tea in the morning. So I guess you need to know whether people like tea or not, but it's just like, do you want tea or coffee in the morning? It's just, it's what you do, Yeah.
I feel like the isn't the British culture just filled with kindness like to the max? Like, isn't it all so many kindness rituals?
Yeah.
Isn't that the
and
pejorative?
those conventions are often misunderstood as being I think they're understood to be like a little bit uptight, or there's a reservedness there, but a lot of that comes from kindness. A lot of it comes from ensuring that people know how things are, and making it easier to navigate circumstances. Like we very definitely stand in line and wait our turn, and you just wouldn't not do that. Like everybody cramming in and pushing in and trying to get into through a little door or something. It's just like, oh, you wouldn't you don't do that. And then people get very irate if someone just kind of comes and cuts in the line or whatever. I remember when I first started visiting America, so I think probably it was like my second visit, and I arrived at the airport, and David took me to breakfast in a Denny's, a big chain with pancakes and stuff. And I was really jet lagged. I was sort of a bit spacey and whatever. And I walked through the door of the Denny's, and I was just so not used to American culture. And someone greeted me like I was a friend. They're like, "Hey, how you doing? Great to see you." And in my British mentality, that meant they already knew me and we'd met before. And, somehow we hadn't seen each other for a long time. And I was really like moment of disorientation, because the American culture is just full of that kind of kindness. Really, really friendly. It doesn't matter whether you've never seen anybody before, you're just so friendly towards them, just so welcoming. Yeah.
Especially in the
That is a
hospitality
ritual.
space.
Right. Yeah. But it is a ritual, and it's one that is really well dialed in America. Americans have a lot of shock when they go into British stores, or a place. Like, you go through the door and the cashier will turn their back to you. just make sure they've got their space. It's funny how kindness rituals in different cultures are just they misfire or are misunderstood in some way. Yeah.
One other quick example that came to mind, and I liked it because it kind of blurred the distinction between kindness and appreciation. I talked about how I for a long time that my breakfast, I ate the same breakfast every morning, and it started to become kind of a mindless thing where there's really no awareness there. I just kind of go on autopilot. And so I was like, okay, how can I enrich this, put some ritual in it? And one of the elements, I added a bunch of them and experimented, but one of them was to, if I was eating meat, I would think about the animal, that it was actually an animal, that it had a life. I'd usually like play. Sometimes I'd say like, what was its name? I think this was a Bessie. This was a whatever. And so give it even a personality or something like that. And the interesting thing was that immediately a kindness would come up in the sense of like, oh my God, this was a life that I am now taking on to sustain my own. And so there was this palpable kindness toward the animal itself. And then out of that appreciation and kindness to the animal, then all of a sudden the flavor and the kind of the phenomenal logical feeling of eating meat and being energized by it became something that had all sorts of appreciation. So I don't know where the line between appreciation and kindness was crossed, but it was so obvious that both of those were present. I was appreciating the flavor in a way that I'd never done, but is coming from a very obvious kindness toward the animal that had kind of sacrificed its life for me. And that was just it's probably out of all my rituals, that was probably one of the most successful is the meat side of things. I know we started a couple minutes late. I think we're right at about 90 minutes. Should we, I think this would be a good time to stop the recording, and then if anybody wants to stick around for a bit and ask any questions or things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Well, for those who are on the recording, thanks for listening. And yeah, if you have any questions or want to see what we're doing, evolvingground.org is where all of our stuff is. And Charlie and I are both on Twitter too, on that at Jared Janes. Charlie, you're at _Awbery. Is that what it is?
Awbery. Yeah, I think it's on my so my name on my screen has got my Twitter.
Oh, cool. I'm not sure
handle.
If that's in the recording, but I hope
oh, okay, right. At _AWBERY _.
So yeah, reach out. We'd love to hear questions that came up during reflections, anything like that. So feel free to stop in and say.
Yeah, maybe one thing just to end with before we cut the recording. I want to make the point that we are using terminology fairly loosely here. So there is going to be some lack of precision. We're in this particular